your body to fight any foreign agents.
Plants are helpful for the ecosystem.
It's an electronic device for storing and processing data.
The nervous system is all the collection of nerves in your body.
Yeast is a eukaryote.
Welcome to Spectacular Science, where it's all about science, with your host, Akshay.
Hey listeners, welcome back to this episode of Spectacular Science. I'm your host, Akshay. Have you ever wondered why your hair is curly and why your hair color varies from person to person and why your eye color varies? Like I have brown eyes and some of my friends have blue eyes. How does that work? And how do we always look similar to our parents? Well, that's all thanks to genes and DNA. The genes and DNA are basically the instruction manual for all life, and they're present in humans, plants, and other living things. But what are the types of genes, and how do we inherit those traits from other people and our ancestors? And what is DNA in the first place? Well, in this episode of Spectacular Science, I'm going to take you on a deep dive into the science of DNA and genes, also known as genetics. Okay, let's take a deep dive into the human genome, and not just human genes, but genes of every single living thing on Earth. Now, first of all, let's talk about DNA, which is what makes up everything that we're talking about today. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, I know it's a big mouthful. Deoxyribonucleic acid is a type of genetic code that basically is an instruction manual that helps your cells create proteins. DNA is often stored in the nucleus in what's called chromosomes. Chromosomes, you can think of them as kind of storage bins that help store the DNA inside the cell. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so in total you have 46 chromosomes. That's in humans. And all these chromosomes have the DNA and the genetic code inside of them, and this is all encased inside the cell. Every single cell in your body has its own chromosomes and strands of DNA in it. This is basically the instruction manual that tells the cell what to do. So for example, if it's a hair cell, the DNA will tell it how to make the pigment for the hair and how to grow that hair. And if it's an eye cell, it'll tell you what color your eyes are. Well, it won't really tell you in the human language, but it'll tell you in the way of proteins that our body makes. Those proteins are what gives us our physical characteristics, which is what we see in front of us right now. There are proteins in DNA as well. These proteins actually help bind the DNA together and give the body specific instructions. Different proteins mean different things, and the protein actually gives it its double helix shape. Yes, that's what the shape of the DNA is called, a double helix. Pieces of DNA are also subdivided into pieces called genes. No, they're not the genes that you wear. They're the specific types of genes, which are assortments of DNA. These small sections of DNA give you a specific trait. Like there's a certain gene inside that giant strand of DNA that gives you a specific eye color or skin color or even hair color or hair type, if it's curly or straight or whatever. This is what gives you all your traits. You have to thank the genes for that. There are two different types of genes, recessive and dominant. Dominant genes are the genes that are most present in your DNA and are the most regarded to trait. And recessive genes are genes that are not really common in the DNA and do not really affect you. So let's say that your dad has blue eyes and your mom has brown eyes. And let's say you have brown eyes. That means that your dad's gene, which is having blue eyes, was recessive, and your mom's gene of having brown eyes is very dominant. And these can be represented as different letters, capital and lowercase. The capital letters can be represented as the most dominant gene, and the lowercase letters are represented as the recessive genes. These different types of genes are what make us, well, us. That's why we always have these variations, because some genes in us are dominant and recessive. These different combinations of genes and these letters, which are used to represent it, are called alleles, which are all the different possibilities that can be made using all of these genes and all these symbols that represent them. Now that we know the types of genes, what role does DNA play in our body? Well, since these DNA and genes make proteins, we need those proteins to survive and to live and to carry out functions of life. So DNA helps us live, basically, and it creates who we are right now. Every single person on planet Earth is unique, but they always share 99.9% of the same DNA with each other. That's right, I share 99.9% of my DNA with you. I know it's so crazy, but that's actually true, because all humans came from one common ancestor, and that one common ancestor had the same DNA and passed it down generations and generations and generations for millions of years, all the way down to us. And this DNA is just varying by a little bit due to mutations and all those other things, all those crazy things that happen in our DNA. And when they're getting passed down through generations and generations, they tend to change. And did you also know that your DNA could actually wrap around the entire solar system if unwound? That's a lot of DNA inside of your body. And it's just so cool to think about that plays such a huge role. It's in every single cell, and it makes up your entire body, and it makes who you are. That's right, it makes you, and me, and we still have 99% of the DNA identical. It's just amazing to think about it. You know what? I'm going to study some DNA under the microscope. Well, I need a superpower microscope for that. But before I go researching, what did we learn today? We learned that DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, which makes up it's inside of our cells, and it basically gives us all of our characteristics and traits. DNA is spun inside of chromosomes, which are kind of storing boxes for the DNA, and the chromosomes, along with the DNA, are stored inside the nucleus of a cell, which is basically the command center of a cell. And these cells use this DNA to create proteins and to just run their everyday processes of living. DNA is unique, but 99% of the DNA is actually identical through humans. It's so cool. The DNA is also made up of tinier pieces called genes. Genes define one specific trait, like brown eyes or black hair and curly hair, or even straight hair. It depends on the person. And there are two types of genes, recessive and dominant. Recessive genes are kind of hiding in the background and are not really seen in you, and dominant genes are the ones that are showing and the ones that make up your traits. And they're also called by fancy names heterozygous and homozygous. These can be represented by using uppercase and lowercase letters in alleles, which are kind of these combinations of these two types of genes. That's so cool to just think about, that DNA plays such a huge role in our life, and we don't take that time to appreciate all that DNA inside of our body. That's what makes you, and me, and we still have 99% of the DNA identical. I just love that fact. It's one of my favorite facts. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Spectacular Science. Spectacular Science is produced and hosted by me, Akshay J. Raman. Our theme song and additional music are by Charan Ramachandran. Special thanks to Varun Ramachandran. Please visit my podcast website, spectacularsci.com, to find interactive activities, blog posts, articles, and all of our episodes. You can also find the link to sign up for the Spectacular Science membership, where you get lots of bonus content to keep you thinking about science. My favorite of those is the fact of the day, when you get a fun science fact every day. Sign up at spectacularsci.com/membership. Please follow or subscribe to this show on any podcasting platform or wherever you're listening right now. It really encourages me when you subscribe, and it means a lot. Thank you so much. I always love hearing from my listeners about science, and I just love interacting with my listeners. So please contact me at spectacularsci.com/contact or email me using the link posted on the page. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you on the next episode of Spectacular Science next week. Keep thinking about science.